side-by-side racing, cars bunched together, phenomenal passes, high-speed entertainment all day. Yeah, I love this new Atlanta Motor Speedway so much. Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Atlanta Motor Speedway, a fast mile-and-a-half track that over the years had proved to be a track that was old and abrasive and put drivers to the test as far as how they manhandle their race cars while managing their tires. But the last couple of years, it's a new type of Atlanta where we see cars bunched together in big packs racing at almost 175 to 180 miles per hour in big groups, and pretty much taking a page out of Daytona and Talladega and bump drafting and running together in big groups and seeing a lot of side-by-side action and slingshot passes left and right in the turns, on the front straightaway, on the back straightaway. It has proven to be a very entertaining track since we have transformed into this new configuration at Atlanta. And yesterday was no different. We saw some amazing racing all day long, and at the end of the day, a Toyota driver came out on top on a day where it was dominated mainly by Fords. Let's get into all that went down yesterday. Number 1, Bell out on top. Christopher Bell scores his first win of the season, winning yesterday's ambetter Health 400 at Atlanta Motor Speedway, holding off Carson Hocevar, Kyle Larson, Ryan Blaney, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. for the victory in a race that ended under caution. To start off with Christopher Bell, he did not qualify well at all for this race. He started back in 32nd spot. A lot of the Toyota drivers actually didn't even qualify in the top 20. They were struggling with their cars when it came to qualifying speed. But you had the feeling that even though they may be struggling qualifying wise, they were focused on handling and racing their way up towards the front. And at the end of the race, we saw that number 20 car, Christopher Bell, who was hovering around the top 15 to top 25 for a good portion of the first half of the race, start to slowly work his way up through the field by the time we got to that final stage and started to become a factor. Actually, one point during the race, Christopher Bell grazed the wall through turns 3 and 4, but kept on going and didn't suffer significant damage whatsoever, and didn't seem to hurt the car whatsoever. Bell found himself inside the top 5, top 10 with about 50 laps to go in the race, and was starting to get up there and get his elbows out against a lot of those Fords and some of the Chevys that were up front, putting a challenge to those Fords for a lot of the race. Then we had a late race yellow with 2 laps to go in regulation, and Christopher Bell found himself on the outside of the front row next to his good buddy, Kyle Larson. And you're seeing 2 dirt racers go at it for the win. You had to get your popcorn ready because you know those two love to put on this show, no matter whether it's at a dirt track or on a NASCAR track. Then we got into that overtime restart where Christopher Bell initially fell behind Kyle Larson for a moment, but as they're coming off of turn 4, coming to the white flag, Bell has a massive run behind Larson, and as he heads up into turn 1, takes that move to the outside and is hanging side by side with Larson through 1 and 2, while everybody behind him is bunched up, racing side by side for position. Then as we get down the backstretch, Christopher Bell got a push from behind, a little shot from the 77 of Hocevar, and as we head into turn number 3, a wreck happened right behind the leaders, which generated NASCAR to throw the caution flag, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And the moment those caution lights came on, NASCAR had to look back and see who was in front the moment the lights came on. And I had a feeling by the time the lights were on that Bell was ahead, and when we got into slow-mo and just matched up the cars at slow motion of the speeds they were running, along with the caution lights and when they automatically turned on, the 20 car was out front, and thus Christopher Bell gets the victory. On a day where we were talking about the Dark Horse Mustangs being so strong in race trim as well as how well they all qualified, and then seeing the bow ties, the Chevrolets, run up front and mix and mingle with them a lot of the race and start to take over in that final stage, we never really expected a Toyota. Toyota really hadn't been a factor for a majority of the race. We never saw Denny Hamlin really get up front and challenge for the lead, even though we've accustomed to see him do in the past. We never saw Chase Briscoe really have a chance, even though he got up there at times. The 2311 cars were struggling to get up there and compete at the front and leading laps. But Christopher Bell, he led 1 lap all day long. The lap that mattered most, the last lap. And that's him being in victory line. And post-race, he said, you know, these restarts can get hectic, especially with this type of racing that we have in Atlanta. But he said, I'll be the first to admit, I love super speedways. And that's pretty interesting given the fact that Bell's record on super speedways hasn't really been the best. But to hear him say that with confidence post-race, it must tell you that he loves this type of racing. He just may not have had a lot of luck in the past. But yesterday, luck was on his side and a good race car at the end helps you get up to the front and be there when it matters most. And we're not surprised, honestly, to see Christopher Bell get in a victory lane this early. We knew this guy was going to be a threat for wins and possibly in the championship this year because of how talented he is. He is becoming, once Denny Hamlin steps aside and decides to not drive anymore, Bell is starting to now become the face of Joe Gibbs Racing. After years where they had those veterans in Hamlin, Kyle Busch, Martin Truex Jr., and even prior to that, Matt Kenseth and Carl Edwards, now it's Christopher Bell's team. And he is really showing up to be one of our stars of the sport. And it would not shock me one bit if he makes it to Phoenix this year and is a champion of the sport because his talent is very deserving. So a big congratulations to Christopher Bell and the number 20 team on an impressive win from where they started yesterday. But one thing I want to finish off with before I carry on. We talked about the finish of the race and Christopher Bell being ahead with the lights the time the caution lights came on. People are frustrated thinking, no, they should have let him race back to the line like they did last week in the Daytona 500. These last few weeks, it's been a little bit of an inconsistency with NASCAR determining whether or not to throw the caution versus letting them race back to the line. If you remember the dual race, they're coming to the tri-oval to the checkered flag. Eric Jones, Austin Cindric side by side. Wreck happens behind them. They turn on the caution lights, race is over when a lot of people thought they're inches from the start-finish line. Let them race. There are not many cars behind them. True, but NASCAR made the decision, felt like we don't want anybody getting T-boned. And that's why Cindric was the winner and Eric Jones wasn't. The truck and Xfinity races, those finishes, they're coming off a turn 4 to the checkered flag. Those multiple trucks behind the leaders, they had the right to throw the caution there. That we're taking the white flag in the Xfinity race. Wreck happens as they're coming to the tri-oval when they take the white. They throw the caution, race is over. The end of the Daytona 500, I can understand NASCAR not wanting to throw the yellow and letting them race back because it's the Daytona 500. It is the most coveted race of our sport, and we don't want to see, the biggest race of the year end under yellow. And, they let them race back to the line, even though there weren't many cars bunched up on the backstretch into turn 3. But Saturday's Xfinity race, NASCAR thought, we probably should not have let him race back to the line because there was a wreck on the last lap. While Austin Hill, Justin Allgaier, Aragon all drove away, along with a few other cars, there was a wreck that happened, and NASCAR felt like we probably should have pushed the button to indicate the yellow light and end the race. And they said, talk to the drivers. Elton Sawyer said it best. We had a discussion with the drivers, and we will throw the caution flag and yellow lights on in overtime at the end of this race after they take the white flag if there is a wreck that transpires. And it did. And I understand people are frustrated and they're thinking, we want to see a good finish. We were possibly on the way for another 3-white finish because the top 3 were side by side entering turn number 3 when the lights were displayed. I understand that. But driver safety matters, and they needed those cleanup crews and the AMR safety team to get to those cars that were wrecking on the backstretch into turn 3 and check to make sure they're okay and prevent anybody else coming up from behind T-boning anybody on impact. We don't want that. We don't need anybody getting hurt in this sport, even though it's the rest that these drivers take to drive these race cars. But I understand that there is an inconsistency when it comes to cautions right now in NASCAR deciding whether or not to let them race back to the line versus throwing out the yellow and ending the race right there on. I can understand there's a problem with that, and they have to, find a fine line as far as determining whether or not to let them race or throw the caution flag. But thankfully, we don't have a drafting track until the end of April at Talladega, so these next couple weeks, hopefully, we don't have this type of problem. So a big congrats again to Christopher Bell on the win, and NASCAR still trying to figure out when it is right to throw caution at the end of the race. Number 2, Hocevar with a career-best finish, but makes some enemies in the process. Carson Hocevar yesterday, folks, had a very fast race car. He, like Christopher Bell, did not qualify well. He started in the 26th spot, but the moment they waved that green flag to start that race yesterday, he slowly worked his way up inside the top 10 and hung around there for a good majority of this race. We've seen the talents of Carson Hocevar the last couple years in the Truck Series and last year and how he did in the Cup Series with Spire Motorsports and gave them some good runs, and he won Rookie of the Year honors last year. And yesterday's race was no different. He showed some strength early on, and he seemed like he had a good car and was in contention for the win at the very end of the race. Well, even with him running up front, he did push some people's buttons yesterday the way he raced. And in stage 1, I'm not sure what it was that he did, But he did something that made Kyle Busch very unhappy, and Kyle was not pleased with how Carson Hocevar was racing him. And then towards the very end of the race, or in one of the restarts, we had a little bit of a stack up on a restart with Ross Chastain and Carson Hocevar. Now people say, well, Chastain has had a history of getting into guys and making people mad. Yeah, but this last year, he didn't really do too much of that, and he's gotten better. And I think he's matured a little bit in learning how to tone down his aggressive style of racing, even though don't be afraid to get your elbows out, but don't do it so much that somebody may come find you post-race and try to swing a punch at you. Hocevar apparently did something really wrong to Chastain at the end of that race that got him frustrated. And then with a couple laps with under 30 to go in the race yesterday, Ryan Blaney, our pole sitter, is running on the inside lane, and then going to one, Hocevar gives him a big shot and sends the 12 car spinning around on the apron of the racetrack, pretty much taking him out of any chances of being up front and contending for the win at the end of the race. And Blaney said on the radio, 77 is an absolute weapon. Despite all that, Blaney, I'm talking about him a little bit, he was able to recover somewhat and get a top 5 out of it. But Carson Hocevar had a chance to win that race yesterday somewhat. He decided, however, to follow the 20 car, give him the shot down the backstretch, and not follow the 5 of Kyle Larson because Team Chevy and Hocevar, and the Spire team has a technical alliance with Hendrick Motorsports. I was kind of surprised he didn't decide to go down there, even though he tried to force his way through the middle as they're going to turn 3 right before the caution lights came out. There was a chance, if those caution lights didn't come out, that Carson Hocevar was possibly on his way off of turn number 4, being ahead by a few inches ahead of those guys, even 3 wide, and possibly could have won his first career cup race. But at the end of the day, he gets a second place finish, a career best result for him, and gives him a lot of confidence to show that he can still be really competitive in these races. But you saw post-race, he had discussions with Chastain and Ryan Blaney about the incidents of what happened on the track. And Chastain and Blaney, both said, we are going to decline our statements about what we said to Carson Hocevar. Post-race, they didn't want to say anything wrong and felt like it's best they kept it to themselves. Carson Hocevar did, kind of in a ways, I feel like he did, more so, accept responsibility for his actions on the track. And, he's known for a while that he's had some of this aggressive style of racing that's pissed off a lot of drivers, and he knows that he needs to get better at this if he doesn't want to have any more enemies going forward in his cup career, because he's still a really young guy. He's very talented, but when you push over the line when it comes to aggressive style of racing, there's going to be a lot of people that are not going to be very respectful of you. So he's got to learn to tone down that aggressiveness, like I've seen somewhat from Ross Chastain. If Hocevar can learn to tone that stuff down, people will probably give him a lot more respect, and maybe competitors will learn to trust him and run with him on these drafting tracks. Yes, he had a fast race car yesterday, but you also need to be respectful of your competitors out there with how you race. And if you race them the way they race you, in a good way, then you're going to have friends going forward. If you go over the line and get too aggressively, they're not going to want to hang out with you in the draft and work with you to get your way to the front. So he's got to learn to try to limit that aggressiveness. But despite all that, a great result for Carson Hocevar yesterday. Number 3, Larson misses out on a win at a drafting track. Kyle Larson yesterday was so close to getting the monkey off of his back, which means having a drafting track victory in his back pocket. Kyle Larson has had a lot of bad luck when it comes to drafting tracks, Daytona, Talladega, and now the Atlanta that we have. He has had a lot of rough luck where he hasn't been able to get to victory lane at any of these events. And 16 races of these drafting tracks, he has wrecked out. He has not finished well. But there have been some races where some of the wrecks that he's been a part of have not been his fault. He has been an innocent victim of some of these incidents. And he's had good competitive speed on these drafting tracks really his entire Cup career, but just hasn't had the luck to go along with it. Yesterday, though, it looked like Larson was going to get the monkey off his back. He had a really good race car and showcased his speed that we didn't really see a lot of at Daytona last week. He showed it yesterday with running up in the top 5 and winning stage number 2, his first stage win ever on a drafting track. About damn time, Larson. And was in contention the final stage all the way from the beginning of that final stage towards the checkered flag in overtime. When he was controlling that overtime restart, I felt like he was going to be the guy to get the job done. But Bell had too big a run on the outside going into turn number 1. And, of course, the push from behind by Hocevar down the backstretch on the last lap gave Bell the effort he needs to get in front of the 5 of Larson. We got him the victory. And at the end of the day, Larson finishes in third spot. But I don't think he's too disappointed about it. I mean, he still wants that drafting track victory. But to finish with a clean car, get a stage win, and a top 5, you can't be too disappointed about that. But there was one thing that overshadowed, I feel like, Kyle Larson's strong run yesterday, and that's what happened that led to overtime. With 2 laps to go in regulation, Kyle Larson was leading going through 1 and 2. And on the outside comes Austin Cindric, who might have had the best car yesterday, with a run to the outside, trying to get by the 5 car, and the 5 is trying to slide up the track to try to clear him. However, he was not clear as the 2 was still there, and he kept pushing further and further up the track to the point where the 2 car got up into the wall, came down the track, and collected Larson's teammate, last week's winner, William Byron, and took both Cindric and Byron out of a chance at possibly winning the race or finishing solidly inside the top 5. That one is definitely on Kyle Larson, and he took full responsibility for what happened. He said, post-race, I have to go back to the replay, but I think I do accept responsibility for that incident in turn 2 that set up overtime. And I applaud him for, owing up to his actions. I do feel like that was his fault. He made a mistake, but he owed up to his actions. Hopefully, still, I hope that Kyle Larson can eventually get a win at this drafting track because he's still so close. He shows that speed. He just needs the luck to go along with it. It almost came into his lap yesterday. Just wasn't meant to be, but nonetheless, a great performance by the 5 team. Number 4, Penske dominates again, but once again can't get the job done. Man, 2 weeks in a row, these Penske cars have shown some serious speed on these drafting tracks, which is no surprise. We all know how good they've been the last couple years, especially with this next-gen car, being so dominant at Daytona, Talladega, and now Atlanta, leading laps and winning these races. I felt like any 3 of those drivers had a chance to win yesterday. Let's start first with the 12 of Ryan Blaney. Of course, he started the race on the pole, didn't lead the first lap, just kind of got kicked back to around 5th to 12th place for a lot of that first stage, but still showed he had speed in that car. Stage 2, he showed that speed once again, running up at the front, and then by the time we got to the final stage, he got back up there with the leaders and started contending more for the lead at the front of the field. But as I documented, with about under 30 laps to go, he got bumped from behind by Carson Hocevar going into turn number 1. He slid down the apron, thus generating caution. Thankfully, he kept it off the banking, down on the apron, and did not come back up into traffic, and he didn't hit anything at all. All he needed was some 4 tires to try to fight his way back up there and try to get the best result. And with about 15 to go, when I saw him in the top 10, I'm like, if he can drive up there and win this race, what a comeback! Unfortunately, there were too many guys up in the front of the field, and then when they started to move out of line and start getting double wide, it made it a little bit tougher for Blaney to get back up there with the fresher tires that he had versus the rest of his competition to have a chance to win. But at the end of the day, to recover and finish 4th, that's nothing to sneeze about. And as mentioned, post-race, he talked to Carson Hocevar about that incident in turn 1 where Blaney got bumped from behind, and he said, I'm going to keep those comments to myself. They'll break through and win one of these drafting tracks this year, but early on, you're seeing our 2023 champion. He's got some serious speed. He's going to win a lot of races this year. Then we go to Joey Logano, our defending Cup champion, where he led the most laps yesterday and seemed like he had the best car. He was running up front and leading a lot of laps in Stage 1 and Stage 2. But then at the end of Stage number 2, some guys pitted when we had some late race cautions in that stage, and Joey Logano elected to stay out to get some of those stage points. He fell short of the stage win in Stage 2 because Kyle Larson got him. Logano restarted in the middle of the pack at the beginning of the final stage, and it just seemed like he could never recover and get back up at the front of the field and contend for the win like we saw his teammates doing. It's really sad because Joey Logano's car was so good in this first 2 weeks of the season. He seems like he's had perhaps the best car on these drafting tracks and just can't seem to get the luck on his side to go along with how strong his cars have been. He was able to recover and finish in 12th spot, but given how strong his car was yesterday, he wanted more, and I feel like when he lost that track position at the start of the final stage, it was really tough for him to get back up there and have a chance at the victory. And then we go to Austin Cindric, who, of course, last week was really strong in Daytona and could have won that race on the last lap if it wasn't for that wreck on the backstretch. But yesterday, once again, showing how good his car was. He led a lot of laps, too. He was in the top 5, top 10 pretty much the entire race. And, again, that last, next to last caution with him on the outside of Kyle Larson in 1 and 2, he was trying to get a run. Unfortunately, the 5 car was coming up the track, even though with the 2-car fender right there, it pushed him up into the wall, and he came down the track and collected the 24 of William Byron. It really sucks because Cindric had a good car yesterday. He was not really happy with how Kyle Larson drove him right there, and he felt like, dude, come on. I was right there. How could he not see me? He was frustrated. Again, Larson owed up and said, the one that caused that, I take responsibility. But it still doesn't negate the fact that Cindric ended the day deep in the field outside the top 25 with the Reds race car and possibly not in victory lane or with a top 5 or so. It sucks. These Penske cars have shown some serious speed the first 2 races, and they don't have the victory by any of those drivers, no matter who it is, to show for the speed they have. But they're going to break through and they're going to win some races this year, whether it be on drafting tracks or short tracks or intermediate tracks or even road courses. These guys have some serious speed this year. They're all, maybe 2 of the 3, or maybe all, will probably break through and get a win this year. And number 5, the racing at Atlanta yesterday. My goodness gracious, this track, even though it's picked up some age and character since the repaved and reconfigured banking of this track, this racetrack is so much fun with these Cup cars and really any series. The truck race on Friday was really, really good, and the finish at the end where they weren't wrecking and seeing Kyle Busch race side by side with his peers was really, really entertaining, and he got the victory. We saw Austin Hill dominate the Xfinity race later that day on Saturday. But it was some really good racing. But yesterday's Cup race, with the cooler track conditions that we had, we just saw a lot of slingshot passes, side-by-side battles, and a lot of guys were racing each other with respect out there, aside from a couple of guys that kind of drove over their heads. But there was some good racing, side-by-side battles, and changes for the lead all race yesterday. This race generated the most lead changes in any race at Atlanta Motor Speedway, with 50 lead changes, a new record, and that was between 15 different drivers of the 39 that competed yesterday. Yes, we did have a couple of wrecks towards the end of stage 2 and some towards the end of stage number 3, but once that aggression level kicks up, you're going to see a lot of these guys get up and get their elbows out and start to become a lot of really aggressive on the racetrack and trying to prevent any of these big runs with some blocks or changing lanes to move either to the top or the bottom to shuffle a guy out that may be in front of him. But that was some really, really good racing. I'm really starting to love this new Atlanta configuration, because the old configuration, was it fun to see some of these guys slip and slide around the track on this worn out Atlanta surface? Yes, but a lot of them were spread out by at least 2 to 3 seconds, and it was getting pretty dull to the point where the fans just had enough. And Atlanta said, okay, we'll repave the track and we'll give it a little bit of an upgrade with a little bit of higher banking in the turns. And that banking has definitely made this racing at Atlanta, with the drafting style we have, a lot of fun. Say what some people want. Some people may not like it, and they're entitled to their opinion. But I think a lot of us seeing this new type of racing at Atlanta, it might become, right now, the best drafting track aside from your Daytona or Talladega. This racing in Atlanta is must-see TV. It's really, really fun. And when we come back here in the summer with that hotter surface and hotter temperatures, these guys with tire wear and older surface, it's going to be very, very, very entertaining. I can't wait for that race. But yesterday, a great race by all the competitors, putting on a show for the fans watching from home or live at the track. Now, we're taking a break from drafting tracks until the end of April at Talladega. Next week, we're off to for some road course racing, baby. Our first road course race of the season will be at Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas. And this time, we're going there to a relatively different configuration of the circuit. Instead of the long extended uphill climb and then downhill climb into that sharp turn hairpin where you've seen guys like we've seen the Cup cars and Xfinity truck cars do since they got there in 2021, as well as where Formula One goes. We're shortening up the track a little bit with a different configuration that has been run, I think, by other forms of race cars, and I'm very excited to see what's going to happen next week. And next week we're going to see what a lot of these teams, what they really succeed at, and maybe we're going to find out what some teams possibly lack at as far as how their cars are performing this year. Next week's the real test to see who has what. And there are going to be a lot of names up at the front next week, especially when it comes to your road course specialists like Larson, Byron, Elliott, SVG. And we've got Connor Zilic making his Cup debut next weekend in a 4th Trackhouse car. And I can't wait to see how he does, because he's pretty good at this road course racing as well. So what will happen next week? Will we see strategy play a factor into the race? Will we see some crazy dive bombs up the hill going into turn number 1? And how will this new configuration make the racing look? We shall wait and see, but I'm very excited about what to expect. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Subscribe, like, and congrats once again to Christopher Bell and the 20 team on their impressive win yesterday in Atlanta. Have a great week, everybody. Let's go racing!